Well, James Daly is the Conservative MP for Bury North and sits on the Justice Committee and joins me now. So, James, what's going on here? This report, published in September, has anything moved since then?
Well, the government are going to respond to that in the next couple of weeks. And first of all, Tom, can I thank you for allowing me to come on to speak about this, because this is not a subject that gets aired very often. And if I could just put some context in respect of this. IPP sentences were invented in 2005, and they were put in place for serious offenders who were deemed to be a continuing risk of harm to the public, but were not merit or did not merit a life sentence. So we had that situation. That caused a number of problems. In 2012, the sentences were abolished completely. But the retrospective sentences, so the sentences that happened before then, they are still in place.
Right.
So we now have 3,000 people still in prison subject to these sentences, and it's quite stark, the figures. So 600 of those people who are still in prison have been in prison for 10 years over their tariff. And I think about 188 have been in prison for 10 years over a tariff which was 2 years or less. So we essentially are in a position where if one of these people who may have been sentenced a number of years ago for a 2-year custodial term could spend 40 years in prison.
Wow.
Now, if we just think about that, that's the basic and the logic as to why this sentence was got rid of in the first place. We have 3,000 people in a custodial environment. I mean, I think we can all, in one sense, think about when you put into a situation where, in your mind, you've got no hope of leaving a custodial environment. The mental health impact of that is quite substantial.
And yet, looking at the rationale for why someone would be able to leave a sentence like that is if they were no longer deemed to be a threat to the public, deemed to be violence or whatever. So surely these 3,000-odd people are deemed currently to be a threat, and isn't that a strong argument for keeping them behind bars?
Well, I don't think so. We haven't seen the evidence in respect to that. It must be the case. If that wasn't the case, then then clearly they shouldn't be there in the first place. But of the 3,000 that are in, 1,400 have been recalled, having been released. Now, 30% of those, Tom, have committed a further offence, but 70% haven't. So about 1,000 of those who are in prison now have been released from custody, not committed a criminal offence at all, but are back in for an indeterminate period. So when then we get down to probably a discussion which is probably longer than the time we've got here regarding what harm and continuing risk to the public means. Now, one of the things that we have with the parole board and the process for releasing prisoners is a very risk-averse approach. I don't think any politician perhaps wants to be in a position to risk releasing somebody who may or may not commit a serious offence, having been put in prison under these terms.
And it does seem that since these IPP sentences were abolished, we have seen a number of people who were arrested in prison for a short amount of time or got a non-custodial sentence and then reoffended. The reoffending rates in this country are relatively high.
The reoffending rates are abysmal, and we need to be tackling that. Obviously, there's some positive steps being made in respect of that. But the reason why I'm here today is that those 3,000 people who are in prison, from the evidence that I've seen, there are multiple mental health issues. You know, I think that, Tom, there's a real argument as well that a lot of these people, because they have mental health issues, because their health has deteriorated in custody, because we are not providing the rehabilitation and support that people need, people are actually, risk is being should we say that people are being locked up because of their mental health. Their mental health and perhaps what would be viewed as their instability is being viewed as a risk factor, and therefore they're not being released, whereas we should have provision in the community where people can go, have these issues addressed and supported, and they shouldn't be in a custodial environment. There are families all over the country who watch GB News, and this is the reason why I'm here today, who are desperate. There are people who want some hope, and so I hope when the Lord Chancellor, we talked with him last week about this, will think very hard about how we can go about addressing this situation. My committee want all these people to be resentenced. Those who are viewed to be a harm, they can continue. A sentence can be imposed which would reflect
that. So it's just a reassessment of those.
It's a resentence for every single one of those, and some may well pose a serious risk of harm going forward, and that will be taken into account by the expert panel that we've proposed. But importantly, there's a lot of people who won't. There's a lot of people who should be in support facilities, have mental health support in the community. And this is a real opportunity to do that and clear a lot of people out of prison who shouldn't be there.
It's a really interesting and indeed thorny subject. I suppose there are strong arguments on both sides. When the Justice Secretary comes back to you, we must get you back on to look through exactly what has been decided in the end. But for now, James Daly, thank you very much for coming in and talking us through a really, really interesting case there.